calling this Fatherless Day, but there are mothers who are affected just as fathers are affected. Now, because of the way custody is set up, because of the policies, the procedures, the way things have been done for years and years, mothers typically get custody in the United States, and especially in Utah, we know that. 16 to 17% of the time, fathers get custody. That's the statistic for across the nation. Unfortunately, Utah doesn't have any type of monitoring system for that other than the census. The court system does not take a look at that. But I can tell you from my experience and from the experience of many others, I can only imagine that that number is below the 16 to 17% standard for the states. On the east side of our gathering, there are a number of pamphlets. You guys are welcome to take one if you haven't already. One of those lists a bunch of resources that are available for fathers and for parents. Anything from if you need an emergency daycare provider to the National Parents Organization. They have usually monthly or semi-monthly meetings that discuss things to do with custody, family law change. Now, my name is Scott Hagerman, and I've been involved in parental rights organizations for the last 5 years. I went through a divorce about 5 years ago. And I decided at that time, and especially from the things that have happened in my own case the last few years, to get more involved in this type of thing. Now, I've been asked to conduct this meeting just because of that association that I've had with some different organizations. So that you guys know, we won't be talking about our own cases today, even though obviously that's the reason we're here. We've all been hurt somehow. We've all lost access to children. Maybe we're part of organizations that help other parents. For me, I have 3 biological children, and I have 1 stepson, and I love them all very much. Yesterday, I actually saw my 3 biological children for the first time in 15 months driving in a car by me, and it was pretty much heartbreaking. We do ask that the rally participants would hold any questions or comments or anything until after the speakers are done. We're probably going to take about an hour with the speakers that are scheduled. Afterwards, if you guys have questions, comments, concerns, definitely grab somebody. We'll be sure to address those. Now, our first speaker is going to be Michelle Jones. Just to let you know a little bit about Michelle, she's a licensed clinical therapist, and she works in a private practice currently in Provo. Michelle received her degree from BYU. She was born and raised in the Bay Area in California. Her love of people and interest in relationships helped her choose clinical social work as her profession. She has worked in 3 adolescent treatment centers, working with teens and their families. And the one thing I want you to know about Michelle, she's actually becoming one of the foremost knowledgeable people on parental alienation. For those of you who don't know what parental alienation is, it's when one parent tries to basically put the kids against the other parent. It's the little pawn games or the mind games that parents sometimes play in custody battles that I'm sure most of you have probably experienced in one small amount or maybe even in a severe case. So in Michelle's spare time, she does play the violin in the Timpanogos Symphony Orchestra in Highland, Utah. She is the mother of 4 children, 3 stepchildren, and 4 grandchildren. After Michelle's remarks, we're going to hear from Land Ray. Land Ray is on the executive board of the National Parents Organization Utah chapter, and he works with legislation research. Michelle, I'll go ahead and turn the time over to you. Thank you.
Wow, new experience with the wind. So I was asked to speak today on parental alienation. And the more I've researched this topic, and I like to connect with researchers all over the country and the world and see what they're studying. There's a lot of research that's been done, but I think there needs to be more people get involved to assimilate it, understand it, and teach it. I think that a lot of the problems that we're experiencing with parental alienation are due to ignorance and not having a clear voice on what it is and what to do about it. And so if people are disputing whether it's real, if they're arguing about what needs to be done about it, it's hard to have a clear voice to tell the court, this is what we need, and this is what's recommended, and this is absolutely horrible, and we need to stop doing that. So I've kind of taken it on myself, I'm sure the others will follow, to gather that, and recently I was able to speak to the NASW. It was a great interest, like not practicing out of the scope of your licensure, an individual therapist shouldn't be making custody recommendations, things like that. So let me just give you a little bit of information. I feel like knowledge is power. So what is parental alienation? First of all, it does exist, but simply put, it is when one parent goes on a mission or campaign to remove the other previously loving parent. Okay, that's a good point there. It's not an abusive parent, it's somebody who had a good relationship from the lives of their children. The alienating parent requires their children to align solely with them and reject the other parent. When done over time, the pressure that the child's under, oftentimes they join that campaign and they will make their own contributions because they start to believe the delusions. It's hard when your life is dependent on that person who's saying it's not okay to love the other parent. So my heart goes out to you because I know that in researching this and reading case studies, there's a lot of people who have spent a lot of money. And I think when it comes to fathers, my heart goes out when people say deadbeat dad, because I know that there's some, if there's a deadbeat dad, that doesn't mean that there's not dads who are fighting with everything that they have, foreclosing on their houses, living in their cars, or whatever they've had to do to try to see their children. I think that needs to be recognized more. So historically, the mental health profession, with all of its research and outcome studies, has gathered a body of knowledge, and that directly influences the family court. And so we need to have a clear voice on mental health issues. We need to understand this is a problem. So I'm going to give you some research. Amy Baker is a great researcher. So in Psychology Today, June 2011, she says, parental alienation is a set of strategies that parents use to undermine and interfere with the child's relationship with his or her other parent. This often, but not always, happens when parents are engaged in a contested custody battle. In fact, a lot of times people looking back, they realize a lot of that started when they were married. It can happen in an intact home. Everyone knows who's in charge, kind of thing. So some of the behaviors and strategies include bad-mouthing the other parent, limiting contact, erasing the other parent for the life and mind of the child, forbidding them to have pictures or symbolic representations of the other parent, forcing the child to reject the other parent, and creating the impression, like sometimes they're not directly talking bad, but they'll say, are you sure you're going to be okay at Dad's? If anything goes wrong, call me. Are you sure you're okay? And calling, or what are you doing now? Are you okay? What message does that send? That you're not safe. And also if the kids come home from a visit and they're excited about their experiences and they get the eye roll or a little bit of distancing. It just takes these subtle little cues to say, okay, it's not okay. And so that the children carry this sadness with them, and oftentimes when they come home sad, because they had a good time and they know they can't talk about it, the alienating parent will say, see, they had a horrible time. They're being tortured over there. But when a child is forced to reject the parent, they are actually rejecting 50% of themselves. A lot of times if people are talking about maybe their parent did something awful, they'll say, I'm so afraid I'm going to end up like them. I'm a part of them. So your identity. But the parent who's alienating sends 3 messages. I'm the only parent who loves you. You need me to feel good about yourself. The other parent is dangerous and unavailable. And pursuing a relationship with that parent threatens your relationship with me. So I think sometimes it's so appalling. I'm here to say this is a form of abuse. It's a serious form of abuse, of mental, psychological abuse, which is not just a problem with high conflict divorce when people say, oh, well, those people who get divorced, that's their problem. This is a societal problem because when these kids' brains are scrambled, when their emotions, they learn to be really good manipulators, hide their feelings, can't be genuine. What kind of employees are they going to be? What kind of marriages are they going to have? This is something that gets passed on generations. They tend to marry people who are the same, and oftentimes, if they were alienated as a child, they marry someone who alienates them from their own children. So it's intergenerational. So we need to look at that. A lot of this is involved with personality disorders. So here's where there's a great deficit with the court, because a lot of times they don't realize the pathology. So most divorces resolve. When people have life-changing transitions, we all go through things like we start school, that's hard. We end school, that's hard. We get married, that's a transition. We get divorced. Most people within a year or two settle down, they get on a new identity, they learn what it's like to be single, and they move on. If people have a personality disorder, they don't resolve things like that. It goes on and on and on. So it's not just about people not getting along. It's about a serious mental health issue. So just to enlighten you a little bit about that, so I'm not calling everybody with mental health issues wicked, but they have learned to cope through manipulation, charm, drama, this type of thing. So some of the pathology that we deal with as therapists is that they're very black and white thinkers. Things are all good and all bad. So if you say there's no ambivalence there, and you don't have authentic emotions a lot of times. So if you're grieving the loss of a relationship, a lot of times that constitutes a longing and an appreciation and a sadness, all those things. You feel it, you move on, you say, well, I remember when we were in love and now it's different, and you just feel all of that and you get it out. But with a personality disorder, whether it be narcissistic or borderline, they don't feel the emotion directly, and oftentimes genuine grief turns into anger and fantasies of revenge. And it seems like it just doesn't go away. It doesn't get resolved. They don't know how to resolve it. So you take the black and white thinking, you take those, you don't know how to regulate your emotions, and what do you get? If a kid goes and enjoys time, so I'm just going to talk hypothetically moms and dads, but I know that dads do this too, because personality disorders, there's men narcissists, there's women narcissists, okay? But if they go spend time with the other parent and they come back and have fun, it's like, okay, you're making me look bad. Or, oh, are you going to love them more than me? Because it's like all or nothing. And so they project and disown their bad behavior and say, you're the bad one, not me. And this is where the accusations come in. You're the rejected one, not me. And they fear abandonment, they fear looking bad. So that drives a lot of their behavior. And but to the court, who never met you before, they come in and say, oh my gosh, we're afraid, and drama, and he did this, and they're like, oh, okay, we better err on the side of caution because we're responsible people and we have to protect children. We're going to step in and separate them just to be careful, which is they're just playing into the hands of the manipulator. And this disease of parental alienation is driven by time. The more time, the more separation they can have with that child to indoctrinate them and to brainwash them, the worse and more severe. So it's a progressive disease. This is some of the messages that I want to get out to the mental health workers and to the court. And when I used to work in treatment centers, oftentimes we'd have a psychological evaluation of new patients before you meet them. They've done like a couple of weeks of all these studies, intelligence, and they would have a recommendation. Due to everything, if they have a personality disorder, oppositional defiance, and I would see this little recommendation, this person will not respond to insight, only boundaries. Okay, there's certain people who learn by, they read something and say, oh, I see how I'm affecting others, I want to change. But when someone has a personality disorder, they don't have any insight. It's everybody else's problem. And so the treatment, it goes against, just talking to them and saying, now you learned your lesson, don't do it again, right? That will do absolutely nothing. In fact, what it does is teaches them, oh, I can push this limit and you're really not going to do anything. That's a problem in Utah. We all know that. Is we need to be bold enough to say this is the appropriate treatment. When people are showing these signs, we have to have sanctions. We got to have, even if it's a woman, because we should just fight abuse and manipulative behavior rather than having it a gender issue. So that's, to me, that's just a matter of ignorance. So those are some of the things, the all good, the all bad. There are ways to look for it because people think, oh, this is so complicated. Well, what if I'm making a mistake? So I know a lot of people who are well-intended, they make middle-of-the-road assessments and recommendations like, well, let's just do this. Well, let's just see how it goes. Well, let's just do a little bit of that. And instead of saying, this is abuse, stop it. So there's a few things because they're afraid, and they also aren't sure how to diagnose this. So Richard Gardner did a ton of research, and there's lots of other people who have done a lot of research to substantiate this and give it different names. So here's a few things. Campaign of denigration. If you study attachment theory, people do not reject their parents, even when they do bad things. You may have ambivalence, but I've worked a lot with kids who really were abused. And they always have this longing. I wish I could, help my dad with his drug problem. I wish I could, talk to my mom, but she's got this, disorder. And they long for that. So it is anti-instinctual to hate. If you see absolute hate with no mixed feelings, that relationship's been attacked. Oftentimes the accusations are really weak, like, Dad took me to dinner too many times. We watched too many movies. He made me clean my room. Just went to a conference, and this guy who does court evaluations, he says, if I hear one more time, I don't want to see my dad because he took my cell phone away. He's like, that's called good parenting. So independent thinker, listen to the child. It's not my idea, and I say, I came up with this myself. Watch out for those things. Reflexive support of the favored parent. They all have the same stories. Doesn't make it true. It means they practice their lines together. The absence of guilt, okay? We're teaching people to be cold-hearted, and it's like, what happened to the old days where we respected our elders, and that if you're not allowed to talk to a teacher that way, you shouldn't talk to a parent that way. And why do sometimes the system say, this kid's really upset, we better separate them, instead of saying, excuse me, you should apologize, you can't act that way, or even just have expectations of them in therapy that they're not going to be disrespectful. And then usually it extends beyond that parent and it goes to the whole family. So what a great loss. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins. When one parent is being denied visitation, you're cutting them off from their kin. Didn't we used to believe that it takes a village to raise a child? There's so many different things that we learn from many people. So let me just give you some statistics before I get blown away. There was some research done in 2009 by Amy Baker, Dr. Lowenstein, and Dr. Krupp, I think you say it. So Massachusetts General Hospital conducted a research project on the effects of high conflict divorce. So this isn't even specifically parental alienation, but just being in the middle of conflict. 65% of these kids had anxiety severe enough to require therapy. 56 developed an attachment disorder, and that's what a lot of this is. Attachment disorders are hard. Hey Scott, can you put a wall right there? No, just kidding. 48% had abnormal fears and phobias. 44% of boys and girls became physically aggressive. 31 had sleep disorders. 29% withdrew from activities, including the ones that they used to love. 24% developed oppositional defiant behaviors, and they had temper tantrums, uncontrolled outbursts. I don't know that it. Thank you for trying.
We'll get close.
Yeah. 13% began bedwetting. 10% developed dissociative personality disorders, and that's when, in trauma, when someone gets it's just too much, they check out. So sometimes they feel like they leave their body, or they lose memories. I can't remember those 2 years of my life. So it's pretty serious. And then Amy Baker also did a lot of research with adults who experienced alienation as children. And this is what she found that they suffered with. Very high rates of low self-esteem to a point of self-hatred. 70% of adults suffered with serious depressive episodes in their adult life. 30% had substance abuse problems with drugs and alcohol. 42% had trust issues with themselves and or others. 50% were alienated from their own children thus showing that it's passed on generationally. 66% had been divorced, and of those, 25% was divorced more than once. So it really makes it hard to have a relationship, and significant identity issues. So I know I need to wrap it up. Just know that there's a lot of research that's been done in the mental health and also in the journals with the attorneys, the bar associations. They've done really long longitudinal studies. We just have to get that organized. So one of the things is false accusation should be, if even one is proven false, that should be, take a serious look at the pathologies going on, because normal people don't accuse others. They actually err on the side of, well, he was having a bad day, and I'm sure it was just a one-time thing, and, you know, that kind of thing. People tend to do that. But a personality disordered person never misses an opportunity to accuse, and they will always be looking for it. And you'll also, if they would just look at maybe videos, pictures, and say, hey, I had a good relationship, and then all of a sudden there's a change, big red flag that the relationship's been attacked. It does not happen on its own. Intense fear reaction by the children when they're being interviewed with the alienating parent. Do they always look to the side? What's the right answer? Did I say it right? That's an insecure attachment, and therapists who are not trained will see that as, oh, look, they're close. They're sitting right next to each other. That's an insecure attachment. I'm afraid of displeasing you, or I'll have hell to pay, because it's, you know, my way or the highway kind of thing. So just a couple more, and I'll try to wrap up. As a targeted parent, I know that you get placed in horrible double binds. So on the one hand, you know, don't come to my soccer game because you make me nervous. Oh, Dad's stalking me to show up. But if you don't show up, oh, he's so insensitive, he doesn't care. So you're always like, damned if you do and damned if you don't. So you have to be very proactive to say, I will stay in contact, I will send this message no matter what they say. So it takes kind of a warrior mentality to get through something like this, to keep your cool. The game is, let's piss him off so that we'll catch him being angry, and that one little thing will be used against you the rest of your life. So it's very unfair. The standards are very high for the targeted parent. That's like, but how can the other person get away with this and this and this and this, and then I just do one little thing, you know? And but that is the way it is. And so just know, it's like, I won't get angry. Yeah, you get angry somewhere in private, but not in the court, and not at exchanges, and not that kind of thing. Value yourself. After a while of being beaten down, it's hard. When kids are severely alienated, they're very rejecting, disrespectful. And so you have to really have a good support group and hang on to yourself and say, it's good for me to be in their lives. And the research has shown that these adults who as children showed alienating behavior always wished that their dad would fight harder. And they always said, well, I know we did these awful things, but I never thought he'd really leave. Because some people do give up. I mean, it's just, it takes everything out of them. And they get sick, they get depressed, they lose their money, and they're like, I just need to have a life. But kids don't really understand the effect. So you've got to see the bigger picture. They're being abused. They're acting in irrational and disrespectful ways. Love them anyway, because it does make an effect. The more contact you have, it goes in there somewhere, and it melts them, and it influences them, all the memories that you have. So if you have any kind of contact, take it, but prepare yourself to be in the mode of, I will connect with my child, and I will create good experiences. It's not a time to interrogate them. Don't do counter-alienating behaviors. Really easy to do because you feel justified. So don't be reactive. I know this is a hard thing, but I kind of lost my last page. It blew away somewhere, but that's okay. It was just saying, I didn't even know it was gone. The last page was a quote about Martin Luther King. And I think when I said the warrior mentality, someone said, you have to be a mix between Mother Teresa and Gandhi to survive something like this. So that requires a lot of support. And it is that serious of a thing. It is abuse. It does take fighting against this, but the way you fight has to be done very carefully and When you become hateful and revengeful, you lose your center. And then you just become what they're doing. And so fight it with love, fight it with truth, fight it with integrity. And I think that together we can make a difference. Keep visiting your kids. Thank you.
We're good? Okay. Good afternoon, and thank you all for showing up on this Wednesday when you could have been doing many things. Hi. Did I say Wednesday? Friday. I don't know why I said that. It's the wind. Blew my brains right out. My name is Land. My last name's Ray. I'm Land Ray, and I work for the National Parents Organization here in the Utah chapter. The National Parents Organization has as our primary mission the goal of making shared and equal custody the default legal status in divorce. We will also address the issues of the equity of child support and alimony, but we need a foundation first, and I'm going to talk a little bit about why it is so necessary that we actually lobby for this. First of all, understand that when we talk about fatherlessness, this is Utah. When we think of fatherlessness across the country, we often think of the unwed parent or somebody who gave birth out of wedlock. This is Utah, let's be frank. Utah has the lowest rate of out-of-wedlock births in the nation. Yet our fatherlessness rate is equal to the rest of the nation. And in Utah, the number one cause of fatherlessness is divorce. Hands down, that's what causes it. And in divorce, we've seen the steady rise. Some indications are that the divorce rate in Utah is actually higher than the national average. And when you look at it racially, that actually doesn't spell well for the state, because Caucasians tend to divorce at lower rates or have lower out-of-wedlock births or lower fatherlessness rates than other races. This state is lagging behind, and it has a big problem. Since the advent of the baby boom generation and the no-fault divorce rates, divorces across America have accelerated. And inevitably, Utah being no exception, we have held very tightly to the notion of what's called the tender years doctrine. The idea that when it comes to marriage and child raising, a man is to bring home the money and a woman is to be the caregiver. Now that system may work very well when you're an intact two-parent home, but it does not work very well when you are divorcing, because now you have two households. And those two households have to take on the entire role regardless of what gender they are. Men need to be nurturers and women need to be breadwinners. And that is not happening here the way we would like to. The social consequences of fatherlessness are devastating. And I won't repeat them because I believe our next speaker will actually touch upon those a little bit more. So I just wish to talk about some consequences that maybe we don't necessarily consider, or we haven't thought about them, or shouldn't think about them the way people are telling us to. I want to ask you this question. If Utah has such a low rate of out-of-wedlock births, why is our out-of-wedlock birth rate accelerating one generation after the divorce rate? The answer is pretty simple. Out-of-wedlock births are not the cause of fatherlessness, they're the consequence. Studies show that children, both male and female, raised outside the homes of their fathers are 8 times more likely to engage in adolescent sexual behavior and reproduce at a younger age and have out-of-wedlock children. The out-of-wedlock birth rate that we see is not the cause, it is the consequence. Another thing I want to point out is that in our history in America, I mentioned earlier that there's a difference between the races. 30, 40, and 50 years ago, the fatherlessness rate of the African American community in America is equal to what the fatherlessness rate of whites is today. And going all the way back to the Johnson administration, policy advocates continuously looked for economic solutions, more aid for families with dependent children, more welfare, more work to jobs. But as the Deseret News pointed out, our society did a very good job of integrating women in the workforce, but has utterly failed at integrating men into the family. And 30, 40, and 50 years of this experiment has shown that men, as fathers, are far more valuable to a family and our children than just the money that we bring. It is my personal concern, as a social scientist, that if we do not start paying attention to the lessons that have been learned from the decades that have come previous, the experiences of the African American community will be repeated in our community, this community which is predominantly white, if we do not pay attention today. Today in the African American community, the rate of fatherlessness exceeds 50% in many areas. And we are now today what they were 1 and 2 generations previously. The lessons must be taken and learned now. We must react now from the tragedies that have happened before they continue into the next generation. So that is why the National Parents Organization is urging everyone to join us in the fight at the next legislative session and for however long it takes to push to get equal and shared parenting, the presumption in divorce cases. Our legislation is very simple. The legislation that we have takes the standard visitation schedule, the minimum schedule, and turns the weekday visit into an overnight visit. That's all it takes. And you wouldn't think for something so simple to give the opportunity for the non-custodial parent to put their child to bed, tuck them in, awaken them in the morning and take them to school the next day, you would not think that we would have so much opposition. For what harm really is there in this? There is none. Yet we have opposition here because Utah clings to a very rigid notion of gender roles, which may work well in a two-family home and may work well in a society where women didn't have jobs and one income earner was enough, but that is not the case today. We are very confident that if we can change this one element in this generation to make equal and shared custody arrangements the default status, we will be able to slow, maybe even halt the growth of the divorce rates. Research indicates, if you'd like to see it, I have it, that in the decision to make a divorce, the number one factor is the expectation of whether or not custody will be achieved. Research after research after research has shown that if there is not a certain expectation of gaining custody, people will not divorce for transient reasons. And this is true of both men and women. If we can establish shared and equal custody, we will go a long way to battling the demise of the family, to slowing the divorce, and in the next generation, halting the damage of fatherlessness that has plagued our society and will eventually bring the same calamity foretold upon us. My name is Land. I'm with the National Parents Organization. I'd love to talk to you afterwards, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Michelle and Land. So with Michelle addressing parental alienation, I wanted to just share an experience that I had last night about 11 o'clock. I received a phone call from a man named Clint out of Arkansas. And the story that he shared with me is similar to the stories that I've heard countless times over and over again by people here in Utah. A year ago, on Father's Day, his wife left him, took their kids, disappeared. He was able to work out a custody arrangement and thought he was home free, thought everything was going to be good, but then it came time for him to exercise his parent time. And again and again and again, over the 7 months that followed, he was denied that parent time, which was court ordered. Now, he made about $3,000 a month, paid about $1,000 a month in child support, plus daycare, plus clothing, plus, as we all know how it goes when we take care of our children. So after taxes and after everything else, he was left about $1,200 a month to be able to support himself and his children while he had them. which wasn't often enough and really wasn't as much as it was supposed to have been anyways. Because of the great stress that he was under, he developed some mental issues, is the nicest way to say it. He started struggling with really bad depression. And thankfully he recognized that, and he did something about it. He checked himself into a center and began to get some help and some treatment that he desperately needed. And the reason he did it is because he knew that he needed to be there for his children. The reason I'm sharing the story with you is not because of that portion, but because of what happened next. Clint's wife, well, now ex-wife, knew that he went in to get help with his depression, immediately went over to the courthouse and filed an ex parte order for an order of protection, covering herself, and also the children. So when he was released from the facility, when he was doing better, he didn't have any access to his kids. He couldn't even call them on the phone. I know Michelle had mentioned that there is abuse sometimes in protective orders, and I know that that's something that a number of our members and a number of the people here have experienced in their own lives. I just wanted to share with you some information about that. So, one analysis back in 2008 estimated that nearly 80% of protective orders, or the restraining orders, that were obtained in custody and divorce situations, they were done so fraudulently. 80%. So that means 4 out of 5, roughly. Now, obviously, we need to have some type of protective orders because there are crazy men, there are crazy women, and you don't need to be associating with those types of people. We need to make sure that our children are safe and that we're safe. But when we have such a high rate, that really tells me something. Now, the biggest issue is that those cases are hardly ever tried. You never hear of somebody going, I don't know, has anyone here ever heard of somebody going to jail in a family court case? Because, yeah, thank you. And now one of the gentlemen who spoke up loudly, he's actually a family law attorney. So that should tell you something right there. Now, I love this wind, I will say that. So now, this is one of the many things that needs to be changed in not only our system of law here in Utah, but throughout the country and even internationally as well. It's become something that's just kind of a way that things are done in family courts and any type of first world nation. People know that they can go in, they can manipulate the system, they can cry wolf. If they get caught, nothing's going to happen. But the thing is I can tell you that you can go home, a man can go home from work, find his house cleared out, find a deputy or a constable sitting there ready to serve him with papers, and he gets basically, he doesn't have a house anymore, he doesn't have any property, he doesn't have access to his children, sometimes a car, sometimes money. He's left without anything for 3 weeks. And those custody orders that are set up then usually require some type of supervised visitation. And at that point, it's very difficult for a person to get that changed because they don't have any money. They can't hire an attorney. They probably don't know what to do themselves because they haven't dealt with it before. So that's one of the things that we need to focus on in upcoming legislation, in my opinion. In addition to the changes that Lance said, there are some basic things like shared custody. You'd think that that wouldn't be a complicated thing for people to understand, that both mothers and fathers do want to spend time with their children. You would think that the police department, that the victim advocates, that the legislature, that all of these groups would understand that when false accusations are made, not only does it hurt the innocent person, it hurts the child, and it's one of the biggest slaps in the face to those who truly are abused, to those who truly are being assaulted and hurt and injured. Because it takes the validity of their accounts and their stories and their things, it takes that validity completely away. I wanted to share one funny, I don't want to say it's a funny story because that probably would come out wrong, but there was a legislator back east in the state of Delaware, and a parental rights group there had actually been trying to work with him again and again and again. They couldn't even get him to return phone calls. About 3 weeks ago, that story I just shared with you, it ended up happening to him. His wife, Kathy, filed for a protective order against him because she said he had a temper and it scared her. There was no physical assault, there was no history of domestic violence, nothing like that. So the House member was actually John Atkins of Delaware. He was not able to see his kids, that was the order. Today, he lucked out when he went to court for his hearing and actually got his kids back, so he's going to be able to spend Father's Day with them. But I know of many, many fathers and many, many mothers who've had false allegations who aren't so lucky. So at this time, I'd like to introduce our next two speakers that we have. Our next speaker is Frank Bedoya, and he is the president of, make sure I'm saying this correctly here, Fathers and Families Coalition of Utah. And he's going to be addressing some of the social costs and fatherlessness. Following which, Brian Godfrey, who's the president of the Fathers' Rights of Utah, will be discussing some of the legal challenges that fathers go through when they try and get custody, and also how once they get custody, the trip isn't done there. There's still battles, there's still people trying to get visitation and trying to get the things that they're awarded in that custody battle. Frank?
Thank you very much. I've been doing fatherhood for the last 10 years, and actually I've been doing a lot of psychoeducational and working with these dads, make sure that they know how to navigate the system. If they need some parenting classes, I was there to guide them and coach them, make sure they are headed in the right direction so they actually have a better relationship with their child. I'm trying to make this quick because I have an appointment with the actual family right after this. But as I see a lot of fathers here today, if there's one thing I could say to you guys is that hang in there. You know, like these fathers that I work with, you know, we cannot win the war, but we can win the battles. Every time you're there with your child, that is winning the battle. Because every year that you spend quality time with them, you're making an impact. You're actually creating a memory for them, how hard you actually work hard to be with them. So make sure that you guys keep that in mind, that we cannot win the war, but you guys can actually win the battle. I remember working with a dad that was referred to me from DCFS. And this happened about 5 years ago. And this father had issues, had calls every month that his wife would actually make all these accusations about his anger, about how he just wasn't the right parent and whatnot. So he had about 6 or 7 calls from DCFS. So they called me and say, Frank, can you do something about this one dad? I goes, yeah, sure, I could try to do my best to help him out, because I run a program called the Nurturing Fathers Program. And it's a 13-week course that I actually work with, and it's only for those type of dads that actually need the help. As I was working with his dad, he was telling me how much his ex-wife would actually try to make these comments just to see him explode. Make things happen so that he could react in a negative way. And once we started having these sessions, I told him that, you know what? As a father, you have buttons, okay? You got large buttons, and your buttons are really large, that, you know what? She knows what to push to get you upset and respond to that. As soon as I told the dad that, every time he would go pick up his daughter from for visitation, she would make these comments just to set him off. And what do you guys think he did? Once he realized that, you know, it's not going to happen today, he ignored her. And this happened the last few weeks, and he was a lot happier because he was now having this relationship with his child. And his ex-wife could not even do anything. She tried everything to set him off, nothing worked. And he was able, 3 months after I was done with him, he was just able to have full custody of her child. But I also told him that I strongly believe in shared parenting. Even though you have full custody, she has every right to be raised by 2 parents. And that's why we really need to actually this year, and I talked to Scott about this, we really need to get this equal parenting bill up this coming legislation session of 50-50 parent sharing. And definitely we also need to come together as one, as an organization, because it's beautiful to come see all these organizations coming together for one cause, because all of us are talking about the same thing. We're talking about children here, because we shared about what the impacts about children being raised without a father. Michelle has mentioned it. She sees these parents all the time. And I go out there and I do the same thing with these parents and teach them how important they are and making sure that they're involved in a child's life, because we definitely want to be there when their child actually is first walking. Fathers want to be there when they first walk. Fathers want to be there when they have their first tooth grown. Fathers want to be there when they want to be a dad and want to coach for the child in a team sport. Dads want to be there when they want to actually tuck them into bed at night. We want to be parents. We could be parents as well as us dads could be, just like any mom. And I totally believe, and I thank you for you guys' time for having me here and talk about this. I think we can do a lot in the future, and let's move forward. Thank you.
One of the first things that I wanted to talk about when I got up here, or say, I'm Brian Godfrey. I'm currently working with Eric Johnson, guy I have a lot of respect for Utah Family Law LLC, but I'm not up here to plug anything. But basically, the first thing I wanted to say is thank you to everybody that's here. I know what it takes to come to the Capitol. I know what it's like to feel like you're not making the movement and you're not going forward as much as you want, but I see this growth here today, and I'm very impressed. I'm very glad that everybody's here. I'm very happy that things are moving the way they are. We've definitely been able to get the word out to a lot of people. Scott warned me about the wind up here. He wasn't joking. I think this is the focal point for the wind, right at the steps here. One of the things that I wanted to talk about is, some of the things that everybody's already mentioned, family and children and fathers. Obviously, it's called Fatherless Day, but we're here to talk about the whole family and all of the pieces of the family. One of the most important and one of the most beautiful sounds that I hear and I love to hear every day is when I go home and my 4-year-old and my 10-year-old. I have some step kids. We don't really call them that in the family, but from my current wife, and then my 4-year-old. When he says "Daddy," like that recent commercial that Dove did, where they touch on all of the children saying "Daddy," how the fathers have answered the call. Normally, I don't really consider myself to be very emotional, but within 1 minute of watching that yesterday, I started crying. And right at work, and I had to, allergies, but when you see the impact that fathers have in the lives of their kids, that's what we're here. That's why we're here. Everybody knows that's why we're here, because we know that that's such an important and crucial thing. Recently, I had to write an article and talk about custodial interference, and it was really hard to do because it's so frustrating for so many of us trying to go through that, because you're already dealing with divorce and things that are hard. But the reason that we stay where we are is because it means everything. So again, I'm really glad that everybody's here. I'm a guy that can bend your ear for hours, but sometimes I get in front of a podium and I get a little nervous, so I apologize. But thank you all for coming out here today, and please stay posted with all of the different groups, and we'll definitely try to keep everybody informed and keep moving forward. So I want to say thanks, and I'm sure I'll see you here next year.
As Brian mentioned, we will be here next year. This is the first annual, so that means we need to have a second annual. I know that some of the states only had 1 person, 2 people show up. I was kind of following them because obviously most of the states are back east and they were doing things earlier in the day. So it's nice to see we had nearly 40 people here today. Obviously, we're not the Clean Air Rally, we're not 5,000 strong, but this is where we start. This is where we start to grow. These are the core group of people that we need to make the changes, the different organizations working together. That's been one of the issues with family law for so long, is that there are so many different organizations, and most of them won't work together. They have some type of pride, I guess, or whatever it is, where somebody wants to be in control, somebody wants to manage this, they don't want to let go. But that's one of the things we need to change. We need to get everybody working together. As I mentioned earlier, and now it's in a little wad over there on the table, but there are some papers over there that have some social media groups. If you guys aren't on Facebook, in any of the groups, there's a number of them. There's an equal parenting group, there's a father's rights group. A lot of times the content is shared pretty freely between those. They work very well together. There's also, for those of you who are stepmothers, one of our faithful people that's involved in family law, Belky, I believe, started. Did you start the stepmothers group as well? Yeah. Okay. So there is a group for bonus moms. I apologize.
Don't step on anybody.
So I invite you guys to take part in those, and some of those resources there are very critical to being able to stay in touch. When we start working on legislation, it's going to come down to you and to you and to you contacting your senators and your House reps and saying, support this. This happened to me in my life. If this law would have been there, my life would have been so much better. This is how this would affect me. This is going to affect thousands of people. You need to make this change. Now, Brian mentioned custodial interference, and for those of you who aren't familiar with that, what that is, that's when one parent denies the parent time of another parent. That can be custodial to non-custodial, non-custodial to custodial. About 4 years or so ago, that was changed from a civil issue in Utah to a criminal issue. The problem we have is that it's not enforced. Very, very rarely is anybody ever brought up on charges, but we hear consistently of parents being denied their court-ordered parent time. Just this last week, down in the 4th District, there was a father who had a half a dozen or so cases of custodial interference. 7? They dropped all charges. So the man was denied his parent time again and again and again and again, and he went and he did the right thing and he got the police reports and he said, help me, I need to see my kids. And they dropped the ball and they didn't do anything. We have another city, out in Tooele, a father reported that the police told them the city prosecutor has ordered the police department to not enforce custodial interference laws. They don't want to deal with it. They can make more money writing speeding tickets and dealing with other things. There are some little rays of hope, I guess you could say. Just a number of months ago, there was a father who had an issue down in Salt Lake County here. And the UPD, after they were educated on the law, they actually did bring the woman up for charges. She was given probation for a year, so she basically just had her hand slapped a little bit. And it had happened many, many times. But this is one where she actually had a little bit of a consequence. And that might not seem like much to get that year probation, but the nice thing is that father then knows that if she does it again, there's going to be some hell to pay, basically, through the court system. Fines, jail time. And we need all of our police departments and all of our city prosecutors to step up to the plate, to start enforcing the laws that have been passed by our legislature to protect all of us and to protect all of our rights. Now, custodial interference isn't the only issue that we have issues with in our system. Last year, I'm sure some of you probably have a little bit of inside information on this, but there was a commissioner in the 3rd District who had reportedly been drunk on the bench repeatedly. He had an affair with an attorney. Allegations were made against him having an affair with an attorney, and he continued to hear cases from that attorney's company, from their firm. And from her, and I did not know that part. So now, eventually, this was brought before the Commissioner Conduct Committee and the Judicial Conduct Board, and there were some consequences that were going to happen. They were actually going to take this commissioner and basically do a little trial on him and say, hey, you know, we've done this investigation. We think that you're guilty of these allegations. This commissioner decided to retire so he wouldn't have to face those allegations. Now, some of this probably isn't very shocking to you. If any of you see the news, you see these crazy people doing things all over the United States. But the thing that bothers me the most is nobody knows about this. The news media, when they contacted to try and do a grandma request to find out about what happened and what the allegations were and what was going on, they were denied again and again and again any type of information. From one source that I talked to, I was told that the reason why that information was barred is because they didn't want to have the integrity of the judicial system eroded. It's my belief, and I can tell you that I know this to be true, that erodes the system itself. We need to know when we have a bad judge or when we have a bad commissioner. All of those people who had their cases heard before that commissioner, they should be entitled to have their cases reheard. Was he drunk? Was he doing something naughty with the opposite counsel? Did that affect my court case? None of those people were ever notified. So some of these things, it's important because they are happening, and some of that information's out there, but it's not really hitting the mainstream media because of it's not being allowed to. Now, I hope to see you all here next year, and I hope you'll bring your friends and family, and I hope the 40 people that we have can grow to 400 by next year. This event was put together very, very last minute. We actually were planning on doing it a couple months ago, and a number of the people that were involved, we have personal lives and things as well. So we'll be reaching out to all of these different groups to try and get things scheduled for next year so that we can have a bigger and a better experience. We did invite out some members of the legislature. I don't see anybody here today. We had a couple who said that they were going to attend. I'm going to be calling them and saying, hey, you said you're going to come, I didn't see you. One thing I do want you to know, because it sometimes seems like we do have the state against us as fathers or against us as parents. One of the people that I talked to, we actually did invite the governor out, but he's out of town this weekend and he's doing other things. But his assistant, one of the people that I talked to this morning, she said, you know what, I think what you guys are doing is great. This is the kind of stuff that needs to be done. So, again, I'd just like to thank everybody for their participation today. Thank you for our wives and all the different organizations that have come together, and I hope to see you next year.
Behind her? Or just her?
That's just fine.
Okay.
Thank you very much.